Okay, now there's a record button. All right, man, I hate Zoom. All right, Grant, take it away. Oh yeah, so real quick, Robin. So once every 2 weeks or so, we do a journal club, which is basically just a chance for us to kind of nerd out on stuff that we like. There isn't really like a set topic. I tend to present on like AIML stuff, but other than that, like I think people have just kind of presented on all sorts of random stuff. We have like the recordings at go/JC recordings if you want to go check them out. But yeah, it's just kind of I think the idea is it's simultaneously a way for us to present about stuff that we think are interesting, and also to like it's kind of like a forcing function to keep us on top of whatever's happening in the industry. Like I know for me, I use this as like an opportunity to be like, okay, I should finally read those ML papers that I've had on my list for like a while and then present on them. So yeah, I figure sometime during your internship, you and Sarah will both give presentations of some kind, but you know, they can be about anything. So whatever you find interesting. But yeah, Grant, take it away.
Cool. Share screen. Uh-oh. Oh, yeah. I can share screen. So I was going to talk about this book about code I've been reading called 99 Balls of OOP. And I'm all posted, like Sandy Metz, one of the authors, is around and writes stuff. And I think I'm all posted an article from her that's good. And I first knew of this because I heard it on a podcast. I think it's called Why Are Computers? For a while, I tried to listen to coding podcasts, which I feel like mostly I didn't like, but that one was pretty good, but I think they stopped making episodes. So she and I think Katrina Owen came on too and talked about the principles and the books. And she, both in her writing and the podcast, like is better at describing sort of the process of coding and like the trade-offs you make than possibly anybody else I've ever heard, which is, I don't, I think it's a hard thing to describe. Like I think, yeah, I was trying to think of like other coding books I've liked even. And there's been a little bit, usually more like general theoretical stuff, but for actual code, like I think there's books that are like programming patterns, which I find like somewhat helpful. Like I think they make sense, but I don't know. They're not, I'm never like super excited to read them. And then there's more theoretical stuff that isn't like generally like applicable day to day. That is good to read. But this is well, I'll go into some weird things about me, and I think I heard her on the podcast first and was like maybe I should get that, but one, it's like centered around object oriented programming, which I like uh, am not enthusiastic about and like try and move more functional. Um, so it's like I don't know about that. And then also it's very like it's it's centered on test driven development, which I definitely do not do. And I think is like interesting, but yeah, it's was like, well, I don't think I'm gonna do it any day soon. So I was like, does that make sense to read? Um, but I did get it, and it is good, even though like that stuff isn't always applicable. I think it's shaped how I think about some things. And yeah, people jump in anytime. I also think like my impression of it was interesting because yeah, I don't totally know the history, but I've always associated test-driven development with like Ruby, and I think Sandy Metz is like a Ruby person, like they come out of the Ruby community, and
Is
uh,
test-driven development just like is that like a term of art? Because I just interpret that as like, oh, we should write tests, but maybe that means something else.
yeah, so I think I mean, this is clickable. It's like yeah, it's a way of doing things where you write the test first. You see the test
Oh, that's
fail,
interesting.
and then you slowly turn them green.
I feel like historically I've always written the function and then been like, okay, based on the function, this is like how I should write the test, which is like not ideal. I can like see why that would fail, right? Because like then there's like obvious edge cases where you're like, oh, you didn't catch that. But okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I find it, I've like, come into contact with it at times. And it's very like theoretically, I think they have a very good case for it. But I don't know anybody who actually practices it. And like, obviously, it can also be like, you don't have to like do the whole thing. Although, like, the idea of it is like, it's a discipline where you really do that. But early days, like the first startup I worked in a like a co-working space, and there was one startup that was like really early days, and the programmer did test-driven development, and like everybody would chat about stuff and ask like the other person who worked there, the other like co-founder, be like, "How's it going?" And she'd be like, "Well, we want to do these features, but like it's taking a while." Because he does test-driven development. Like, so my impression of it there was just like, this takes a really long time. And probably, and also like different contexts that may be more useful in, right? Like if you're at a startup and you're writing stuff that's gonna get thrown away or rewritten, then maybe don't do it then. But if you're working on it, code that's going live and needs to be maintainable in a certain way. Cool. So, I mean, I'm just gonna kind of scroll through the book. So the other thing that impressed me about this book uh, is like sort of how they scoped the book itself. I think is really impressive. So it's centered around um, like the 99 bottles of beer song, although I like that they gave, I think this is the milk. This is 99 bottles of milk because they have a milk option in case you don't want to like read the word beer a bunch, which is like both nice and a very like programmer way to like solve that issue of just like filling the space. Um, yeah, so it's all centered around that and like
Is this
starts,
like is the language? What language do they use in the book? Is it Java?
so they originally wrote it in Ruby and then they
Okay.
have multiple versions. So I have the JavaScript one.
Okay.
Um, which,
Oh, there's a JavaScript. Can you do object oriented? I guess you can because everything is a func. But like, okay, that's a little weird. I don't think of
yeah,
JavaScript as like an object oriented programming language very much.
yeah. I feel like you can definitely do like you can kind of do whatever you want in JavaScript to a certain extent. But I think it used to be more, I mean, I think object oriented used to be more popular in general. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, people used to do it a lot. You can't do it. Yeah, and the constructors are kind of weird. And I feel like I used to get interviews questions about like constructors. I was like, what the hell? I don't know. But that's less now. Um, so it starts out like, how do you, and I'm sure it would have been better if I had actually done the exercise of like, how do you write? So you want a function that returns the 99 bottles of beer song like as a text string. Um, and so probably I don't know how this is scoped out. You want to give it like 99 and 0 and be like construct the song. And then the idea is like you should like try and do this yourself. And I thought about it a little bit, but did not try and do it myself. Um, but yeah, I think it's and so then and goes through different solutions and then yeah, well maybe I'll go through it a little more in context. Um, so then they show you some solutions. There's the incomprehensibly concise. So, and if you haven't thought through the song, like almost always the same, except for 2 bottles of milk and 1 bottles of milk, like, no more models of milk on the wall. Go to the store, get some more, I think is how, so it's like almost all of it follows this pattern, but the last 2 don't. And how do you handle that? And where do you set up your abstractions? Which is cool. So there's the incomprehensibly concise one with lots of,
Can you zoom in a bit?
yeah. I think there is a Python version too, obviously.
I've very, very rarely done object-oriented programming in Python. It's like, yeah, I don't know. I prefer like named tuples and structs and stuff when if I need to maintain state like that, but.
Yeah, I think especially with this one, like there is some object-oriented stuff, but I find that fairly easy to translate in my head. Like, that hasn't.
So the argument here is like, this is like poorly written code because it's incredibly concise and therefore you have no idea what it's doing.
Yeah, and maybe chose the wrong abstractions.
Yeah, I have no idea what this is doing. I mean, I like ternaries, but.
Oh no, I'm so far zoomed in. Where's the next example? Speculatively general. So here it's just make the complete string for the last one. That's not really the penult anyway. You basically write out the strings for the ones that are the exception. And then the other 96 or whatever that are all the same form. You
just, yeah, okay.
Yeah, which is like, yeah, and then it's a switch statement to go through them.
And that one is bad because why? Speculatively general.
Yeah, I think the idea. Yeah, interesting. It says unnecessary complexity. I mean, I like the, I don't know. I feel like lately I'm really into like stuff that like feels like not clever, but like very clear what's going on. I think this is closer to the one they start out with. Concretely abstract. Yeah, so this gets in it, and this is object oriented, I guess, but like some methods that basically try and name the variables a little better. I don't like this one that much. There's a challenge and a response. Yeah.
This one just seems like way more complex.
Yeah.
Is last milk. I love it.
Yeah, right. Well, like, but.
So this one goes too far in like concretely abstract. But this one, they're saying like this one is better than the previous one.
I don't think, I think these are all exploratory. And then eventually, okay. I think maybe the next one, like there's one they settle on at the end of this chapter, but like the idea of that one is it will be refactored, and like a lot of the rest of the book is refactoring it. But this is, yeah, there's some naming stuff. Yeah, so thinking through like, what if we changed the name of the drink? And what should the method names be?
How do you feel about like dry principles? Like, don't repeat yourself or whatever.
This book has a lot on that, I think. Basically, like it is dry is right, but like repeat yourself until you know where the abstraction is.
Yeah, because the thing I've heard a lot, I feel like it's like sort of like U-shaped, right? Like people like beginners will be like, repeat yourself because they don't know what they're doing, and then in the middle it's like don't repeat yourself ever, and then at the far tail it's like repeat yourself because you don't want to like fuck up the abstraction or something, which is like worse.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I've definitely heard similar things. There's a lot of like sort of React Twitter, like Dan Abramov, who did a lot of cool stuff, but I feel like, and he writes about code, like he tries to write how to do stuff, but I feel like a lot of his advice was like people are being too clever, or like don't like contort yourself just to not to repeat this thing. Like you can repeat it for now, you can always fix it up later.
Yeah.
Which is also, so the one they come up with is called Shameless Green, and so I think the green is like that your test pass. And I love that, like I think the shameless thing is really good, and I think they talk about this, that like you end up writing code that in some ways seems like dumber, like, and maybe you don't feel like, you feel like you should be writing clever code, but it's shameless in that you're just gonna do it. And it ends up a lot like some of those other ones, in that there's a switch statement that just,
It looks like kind of like option number 2.
yep, handles the exceptions. Yeah, it's a lot like option number 2. And I think this is like, so you could look at this, very clear what's going on, I think. You know, you're looking around at a code base, you're like, okay. And yeah, there's some questions that
How many verse variants are there?
you can see that 3 through 99
Yeah.
are the same. You can see where the exceptions are. And then,
Okay, so actually this is the section I'm kind of interested in. So like, how is this different from speculatively general? I guess it's easier to understand because it's like inline, like they inline the verses, maybe.
yeah, I would scroll back up, but then I feel like I will take a long time to get back here. I don't think they're
Maybe.
necessarily too different. Yeah.
I remember like one of the earliest lessons I learned in CS was like, and this is not correct, like this is wrong, but like somebody taught me like, oh, like use variables as a way to like, you know, make it clearer, like make your readability clearer or something. Like if you have like a weird thing, like just store it in a variable that has the name that you want. And I think like as time has gone on, that's actually proven to be terrible advice.
Yeah.
Or like
Yeah.
put it in a function or something, which I think is just bad advice.
Yeah. It's a weird balance. Sometimes it's really good, but yeah, if the minute you need to like alter that, yeah, it often ends up getting messy, I think. But I think I posted, because I posted that in dev, like this thing Ganesh did to be like, is branch ready? Which
Yeah.
I liked, which is kind of doing that. But that's maybe a little specific, because like JSX, the like HTML and React thing, you have to use ternaries to like do if
Right.
statements or conditional stuff. So I think that's probably worthwhile to, yeah, make that more clear, but other times it's not. And yeah, there's lots of like this dry stuff is basically what we were saying, like abstraction should make it easier, but if you choose the wrong one, they can be wrong. And there's a section, yeah, just like discussing what makes good code, which is fun. And metrics you can use, source lines of code, cyclomatic complexity, which I
What is
feel like
that?
intriguing, but counts the number of unique execution paths through a body of source.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So conditionals get you a higher score, which conditionals can make stuff hard, I think. But I use a lot of conditionals.
I can see that. Yeah, like more and more as I write my code, I basically like write it so that there's like a single path. It's like there's a single path and then like a bunch of error paths.
Yeah.
Which is I
Yeah.
think like works reasonably well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then this one, which counts variables assigned and messages sent. And conditional logic. So it seems like it tries to kind of combine.
Yeah.
And then they,
Does it talk a lot? Does it talk at all about like, oh, this is cool that it actually like ranks all of them. Okay.
yeah, this
Does
is
it
what
talk at all?
the
Sorry, does it
concrete
talk at all about like
example.
how to make an abstraction or like what the right, is it saying like this is like the right measure for an abstraction or?
Yeah, so I think, so the chapters that follow like refactor the shameless green stuff. And that's basically what it's doing, is trying to like root out the correct abstractions. Yeah, but this is like, also like even trying to like write some instructional stuff, like being able to like refer back to the examples. Like to carry the examples through and show how this applies to it is like so good. And they do it for like the whole book.
It's funny because like I can see the intuition behind something like ABC, but also like who would actually do that? Like who actually reviews code? It's one of those things like this is awesome, but if you ever actually do this, then what?
Yeah, I don't think it's actually, I mean, so I think people make tools, so you would automate it, right? And you would be like, oh, this changed to our code base, like bumped it up this much, and that's maybe not good. I think there's something in here where it's like, and I think like maybe Ruby has like people build those tools, but I think there's something in here where it's like the JavaScript part where they're like, yeah, JavaScript doesn't really have any like tools for like, you know, calculating those metrics on polls.
Right. I feel like JavaScript doesn't even like the way JavaScript does some things like assignments or like branches is like really weird and it might not even like count. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, it's probably not trivial to, but I think it's, yeah, it's doable. For a while I was looking at like being able to make like code diagrams sort of like execution paths, but with like arrows and stuff, which is interesting. Yeah, people can kind of do it, and they do it with the JavaScript gets, then you have to like, yeah, you have to do like abstract syntax tree stuff. I don't know. It's weird. It's cool. Um, so this is actually the testing stuff. Probably go, oh, I think that was like a good taste, and I'll probably go through this stuff faster. Um,
Does it talk at all about like how to write a good test? Because I feel like that's
y-
something I never really like. I mean, I have again, it's like something that I feel like I have some intuition on, but I don't know what it actually like the right
yeah,
standard
definitely,
is.
they definitely do. Um, this is the one where I think, and it's like useful stuff. I do think like the examples sort of easier to, in this case, understand than a lot of like real world stuff would necessarily be, though not always. There's also just drilling in that like run the test after like basically everything you do, even like as you do the tests. And I think Ruby also has, I guess like lots of stuff does, but I think they have some nice tooling around like your tests just run when your code changes and all that stuff.
We actually just set up CI. Ironically, we have CI set up, like CI testing set up on the intern repo, which is the experimental repo. So that's the
Oh,
only
that's
one that
fair.
right now actually has testing. Well, yeah, but like historic, like it's funny because like at least at Google, right? Like the experimental repo was like the one place where you didn't have testing.
Yeah. But
So
even that's like a yeah, that's like a pull request check, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, cause I think they have like, I guess like REPLs, like, so you run your like development environment and it's just checking on each code change locally.
Okay, yeah. I mean, yeah, I would do that too.
Yeah.
Because like the full test suite was always like much more expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't, yeah, I don't actually want to, I don't know. It's interesting. I don't actually want to do it. Um, bop, bop, bop. Tolerating
Tolerating
duplication.
duplications.
There's lots of little stuff that's written really well. I'm gonna zoom out a touch. This is a good, so like, I feel like I've run into this. Like one of the things is that there's like one bottle of milk and you need to say bottle instead of bottles, which you can like do. So like you can obviously do that, but like what is that abstraction? And how does it, because they start with pluralize, but
That's gross.
they decide against it.
There's something about that just feels really weird.
Excuse me.
Yeah, I guess I didn't think about the bottles thing, but that's also kind of annoying.
I'm gonna, yeah, try and get to the next chapter where they start. Refactoring. So this is, yeah, this is still their same thing. This was just about writing the test for it, which again, I'm like, yeah, this is why this takes forever. But I guess the point of it is too, is that they've written those tests because now they're going to refactor. And the
And
idea
keep the
is that,
test screen.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can refactor and have like complete confidence that, except you probably wrote your test wrong, I think, but
Well, yeah.
yeah.
There's sort of funny. It's a funny thing, but like I told Ganesh like a while ago, and I still kind of believe this is like I don't trust anything that my code, like any of my code, until it's tested. Like I only know that my code does what the tests say. I don't believe it does anything else correctly. If it does anything else correctly, it's purely by happy accident.
Yeah. Good thing on code smells as a way to start refactoring.
What does it
Uh,
define as like code smell?
I thought it was just going to give me a list. I think it refers to another book. It's like you should read this. In his refactoring book, Martin Fallows identifies and names many common flaws.
Interesting. Okay.
Feature envy? I don't know what that is. That primitive obsession, inappropriate intimacy, shotgun surgery.
Primitive obsession I've seen. That's a pretty funny one. I know what inappropriate intimacy is. That one's also a funny name though.
Yeah, and then there's a set of rules for what they call flocking rules. This is good. Like, I'm like, this is good. Select the things that are most alike, find the smallest distance between them, make the simplest change that will remove that difference.
Is that a reference to refactoring?
Yeah.
Like how you should refactor? Okay.
Yeah, so, and then they go through it with the bottles code. That's what they have.
Is the idea that like the difference would be between the thing that you currently have and the thing that you need in order to make the thing that you currently have work with some new setting? Is that kind of the idea? Because like on face, like the impetus for the bottles code is such that like you don't need to change the bottles code. It works. So what's the impetus to change it?
Yeah. Well, so the difference they get into, it's like, it's how to abstract the code further.
Okay.
So it's like, here they start like the difference between the default case and the case most similar to the default case, which is just the pluralization issue, I think. So that's that, but why it's motivated, I think, I don't know if they've done it yet. At some point they introduced the idea that like, what is it? That the type of beverage has changed. Or they want to change it to, they're like, oh, but it's the simulation. It's supposed to be like the requirements of the product changed.
Mhm.
And you now need to change your code. I think it's actually when there's 6, you should say 6-pack. But like, obviously it's arbitrary, but yeah, the idea is, yeah,
Gonna
I
go
mean,
shotgun a 6-pack of milk right now with the bros.
yeah, but I think it is sort of like, yeah, like this is an exercise. I think they're totally on board with just sticking with like that shameless green and being done unless like you're like frequently returning.
I mean, sort of tangentially, but I feel like I've never, I don't know. I feel like it's so rare that these kind of small examples like provide reasonable analogies for like the complexities of real world code.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just thinking about our code base, right? Like we have all this like there's a bunch of stuff like related to S3, right? And like I think a lot about what the right abstractions are and where like different functions should be in relation to like our S3 interfaces. And I don't know how to like generalize from this 99 bottles example to that level of complexity.
Yeah, I definitely feel like it doesn't directly, but I think it's sort of had the effect on me of worrying less about like abstracting early, like sort of
Hmm.
writing. And as they get into the more of the refactoring, I think I've been better about, so like, I'll be like, oh, this function is going to end up being shared across methods, so I need to take it out of this one function that it was like, it's in one of these methods, it can be reused. I'm going to take it out. And I feel like I always knew you should do this, but this has made me a little better about, to start with, just getting the lines of that function out, naming that function, like copying and or cutting and pasting them into it, and like making that, just going step by step, like making sure that now runs like it was running with that one function and the generalized function. And before I start, yeah, just
We
going
don't
a little
have
more
unit
step
tests
by
on the
step.
front end, so
Yeah, and so that's it's not test, it's I refresh the page and
yeah.
or
Yeah,
like actually it gets
yeah,
hot
yeah.
reloaded. But um yeah, and there's actually been some, like, I think UI testing is really hard, like hard, and
Because like
there's
all
been,
integration testing, I feel like.
yeah, and there's been a little more, like there was like a sort of like React JavaScript controversy where people were saying different stuff. Um, yeah, like some stuff, I don't know, but yeah, thinking about like the behaviors on our front end that you would test. Like you can write tests for some of it, but I don't. So I think it caused me to go a little more step by step, which is great. And also I think it's always interesting because it's like, did I learn anything I haven't heard before? I don't think so, but like, am I a little more like convinced? Like, do I just like believe it a little bit more? Yeah. But it's a very like painstaking process here of, yeah, like doing the smallest change and making sure it works, making sure the test still pass green. Um, and they talk about it on the podcast because I think Katrina, one of the authors, is like programming every day and said it was like, yeah, a change in her mindset. I guess just of like trusting the tests, like kind of completely, and trusting the refactoring rules. and this process of like refactoring being sort of like a calming process, because it's like, I have these rules, I'll follow them. This will gradually be shaped into something else.
It's very zen.
Yeah, it's yeah, very intriguing. Uh,
I will say I definitely agree that there's something very satisfying about writing. I don't want to say writing test-driven development because I'm not saying I'm writing the test first, but like writing a set of tests and then knowing that your code passes those tests. It's not. I feel like it's not satisfying in the moment, but like later on when you make a change and you see that the
yeah,
test still, it's like, oh, okay, like it's like a load off your mind, right?
yeah,
I
definitely.
don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're out, you've, yeah, like outsourced that.
right.
Yeah.
Like this is why we run the debug pipelines every time we deploy, because it's just like in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, I know that nothing should have broken. At least to the front end. I mean, for a while we were having problems with like, old data or like stale data that was causing problems in the back end, but that's like sort of a different, well, I guess that's actually related. But
Yeah, well, that's my, so I think the risk is like the same that people talk about with like any measurement, is that if this only works for sort of the stuff that is really good for writing tests for, then you sort of end up trying to fit everything into that box, or like ignoring the stuff that doesn't fit. And like,
yeah,
there's lots of stuff that doesn't fit. So I don't know.
I was thinking about that. Like, I wonder if it's, like one downside is absolutely that you end up having to like write things into the unit test format. But then there's another thing that's like, maybe that's actually a feature and not a bug. Because like forcing yourself to write like code that can be easily tested is like, okay, well then it's like kind of what you want to do.
Yeah. And like for our situation, I mean, I think the big counter argument is just how much of the code is going to be thrown away,
Yeah, yeah,
and the time that would go into like testing or even like refactoring stuff that is just not going to be around.
yeah. I 100% think that like, I mean, that's why I haven't been super anal about testing stuff for the code that we currently have. Although I think at some point I want to probably add unit tests for some of the backend stuff because I think it's getting more stable now. Like the REST API, I think is like getting pretty stable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is interesting. This is like after the first refactor. And I don't know. I don't know. It makes sense. I don't love like seeing this. I think it is like well named, but this capitalize this dot quantity, this dot container.
I don't like the
Feed the
this. Like
number
that's the
all.
thing that really annoys me. Like
Yeah, which is the
I know it's a
object oriented.
class. I know
Yeah,
it's like the fact that it's object oriented is like the thing that actually drives me up the wall.
but you
Um,
can like, you can,
there's nothing about this that
yeah,
isn't functional. Like this is a
yeah,
like these are just methods, you know.
yep. So you
Um,
could basically, yeah, you could just get rid of them. But yeah, it's interesting, and they do also refactor this more, but like they did sort of identify that like the number going in is what changes things. And I think it's a nice move to like be passing that number. Successor, so that's like because like you're like 99 bottles, take one down, 98. Successor is probably like a fair name for that. That's probably a hard thing to name. Excuse me. And this pronoun one is kind of funny. Is one
I
if
guess
two.
I guess also like one of the things that's coming out of functional world is like you expect your functions to be verbs.
Hmm. Yeah, I
Um,
think that's a big, and that I always associated that with Ruby. Like this seems very Ruby to me. But you could, yeah, I'm with you. I think that would feel better to me too. Although I'm not sure what I'd name all these. I think that's about where I am in the book. It is like, and I feel like this happens a lot, like, it is just pretty like painstaking, so I'm like, I don't know. Do I wanna read the
I don't
next
think I've ever like fully read
refactoring
a
step?
programming book end to end. Like I keep
Yeah.
them around. Sometimes I'll keep them around as references, especially the ones with like the fun little animals on them.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah, which are, like, some stuff is more like directly reference.
Give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
Yeah, of course. Your pierogies are here.
Hello. I think my pierogies are here, but they probably left them downstairs. So anyway,
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
that
it's
makes sense.
late. This took, okay, it's later than I thought.
um, yeah, I think I don't know. Like, yeah, functions not being verbs is it's weird to me, but I guess that's just object oriented. Cool. So what's the rest of the book about? Like,
I think they keep refactoring. Let's go look at the table of contents. Ah. Yeah, there's this, which also isn't like the craziest thing, but I do think about it now, a distinction between horizontal and vertical refactoring, which basically
what does that
like,
mean?
it means like finish the thing you're working on. Like if you spot something. So the explanation is like, it's actually about like horizontal is if it's on the same line, but it's somewhat metaphorical, like, so it's basically like, sort of like how you structure your commits to, like, you try and fix the thing you're fixing. And even if you spot something else, you put it on a list to fix later. You
Oh
don't
yeah, okay.
succumb
You
to the
don't.
temptation to change that.
I feel bad for Ganesh because I do that all the time. Like this
Yeah,
is
well,
why
that's what I think your taking out backwards compatibility thing was.
yeah.
Um, it's like, yeah,
Like
I
I
mean,
don't need to do that in the same commit. I
yeah.
I really do have that problem because like I'll notice something and it'll just drive me nuts. Like one, I just submitted a PR, and it's funny because I'm talking about it and I feel bad about it as I'm doing it, but I still do it anyway.
Yeah.
Because like the knowledge that like so a good example is like we were inconsistent about when we use chords versus coordinates.
Uh-huh.
So I just like made the decision like, okay, we're going to use coordinates everywhere. And so as a result, like this PR, which ostensibly has nothing to do with some of the files that end up getting changed, have like changed lines that like relate to coordinates. And of course, Ganesh is going to look at this and be like, why are you doing this? And I'm going to be like, because I'm fucking anal about stupid shit like this.
Yeah, and I do the same thing. And I think there is some, like, I don't know. I think it's all like depends a little bit, because sometimes it is just like, get this done and it's done and we're done. But
So that's kind of why we set up the fix-it days, right? Is to like
yeah,
try and block out a time where we can like do those things. Which is
yeah.
like, I don't know. That's like kind of been working, kind of not. Like I'll use it sometimes, but that's also ironically become my like primary meeting day because that's also when I have all my one-on-ones scheduled. So I end up like not doing anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. This
Yeah,
is
it's
neat.
good. And I feel like, yeah, one thing that I'm like, there's also like, just within it, there's like very good descriptions of like, it's very well written, and like, in that it's like descriptive of it nails the trade-off, or it like
Yeah.
perfectly describes the thing, and I'm very impressed by that. Yeah.
One thing I haven't really seen written about, although maybe it has been, but like this is something I've been kind of chewing on recently, especially with as it relates to like the back end, is this idea of like writing code in patterns. So like I like this is kind of like I guess related to like the kind of like concept of what the right abstraction is, but like anecdotally, I feel like I found more and more that when you structure your code such that it follows a pattern that a lot of other parts of the code base follow, or like all the different parts of the code base can follow the same pattern, then it's more likely to be the right abstraction than not, if that makes sense. So like a good example of this is like in the back, I don't know how much of the backend code you've seen, but in the backend, we were doing error handling in like this like really kind of messy way. And then we implemented this thing called status or, which is just like, it's a name tuple that either has a status or it has a value. And so it ends up allowing you to create this pattern where like every function basically will return a status or that not like every function, but like a lot of the functions end up returning status ors, and it allows you to create this like, if status or is okay, then move on. Otherwise, like return some status or something.
Nice.
Yeah,
that's.
I feel like I might want
in React too, like that. Like, do I have this thing loaded or just in general?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Same thing.
Especially in all like typeless.
Yeah.
Languages. This is a problem.
Yeah.
Right.
And I do null, like I use null and then I do explicit null checks. And
right.
It's
That's
okay,
kind of right.
But doesn't feel great.
The status or thing is actually something I took from C++ at Google. They had like a status or, which like worked really well. But yeah, I don't know. I've been thinking about that a lot. Like I'm thinking I might write up something about like writing code in patterns instead of like, because in some ways I almost wonder if like, you could actually even like, I would be willing to take on some amount of like duplication and complexity and maybe even coupling if it meant that like things were written in a pattern that somebody else could like easily look at. Never state management is terrible and you should never like sacrifice anything for state management if you can avoid it. But I hate state management. I don't know have you seen that?
You know what you should do is we should switch to Node and everything should be in JavaScript and then we could just use the same code.
So like you say that, I think ironically, but like, version 2, we're on version 1 of the API, like version 2 of the API will absolutely be like a Node. There'll be like a Node interface in between. Because like right now their infrastructure is all basically like we have a big box and we can scale that box horizontally. So like we can add a bunch more boxes, but to like handle those requests or whatever. But like realistically, what we should be doing is we should have a very thin box that then spins up a bunch of workers or something, depending on what's needed. So our big box is Python, but our thin box should probably be Node, and then the worker queues would be Python or whatever, or like whatever language makes sense for what it's trying to do.
Because Node's the best way to do the like parallelization of that.
Node is just very good at handling asynchronous stuff, right?
Okay.
Like that's kind of his whole shtick. So, and like Python is not like, I like Python, but it's really good. It has like great library support and C bindings and whatever, but like threading is not, if I had to deal with threading, like Python is not the tool that I would like go for, I mean, Flask is reasonable. Flask abstracts a lot of that stuff away, but then like when you start thinking about like nested threading, then it gets like really messy.
Yeah, that's what all my coworkers would go to Flask on at my last job, and it's like, it works. It's better, but like, yeah.
The only reason we're using Python is because like all the statistical tooling that we're using, like, TensorFlow and whatever is like in Python.
Yeah.
So it was a choice, like doing asynchronous stuff in Python is annoying, but doing statistical modeling in JavaScript is horrible.
Yeah.
There's a library called TF.js, and I just don't even want to like think about that monstrosity,
Yeah, well, my coworker did because like the reason people would do it is to run like live in the browser stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it did not seem fun. Yeah, it's like nothing's, and the JavaScript like community is like, it may not be the best. Well, basically it runs in the browser, but they'll like keep working on it so like, I don't know. I bet eventually it'll get like pretty robust.
Eventually it'll all just be ASM.
It'll take over. Yeah, let's do some of that maybe. I don't know.
WebAssembly, everything.
I was trying to figure it out. I basically a while ago was like, should I do more WebGL or should I like figure out Rust and WASM? And I did a little bit of Rust. Their documentation was also like super interesting and good. But there was a good talk that was, why is the WASM, it was like a conference, why is the WASM Summit website not written in WASM? And it was like, you probably don't need this for a website. Like,
It's
you
pretty
gotta
good.
be doing something very specific.
Have you seen the guy who did WAT? He has this talk, the birth and death of JavaScript.
I may have watched it at some point.
Okay, that one's really funny. It's like it kind of like is like a history of
Is that when he's
JavaScript.
fake in the future?
Yeah, he's like faking
Yeah,
the future, right, and he's like pretending that he's like talking from 2040 or something.
yeah. Well, is his thing kind of like JavaScript? No, because it died, maybe.
No, so his idea was, this is Gary Bernhardt. His idea was like, and I think like, you know, in retrospect, like listening to this, like of course this was not going to happen, but his thing was like, okay, so first you're going to have JavaScript, and then people are going to like realize that you can write ASM and just write like other languages that then compile to JavaScript. And so I think he got it up till there correctly, which makes sense because like when he gave the talk, which I think was in 2013 or 2014, like Unreal had just released
Right.
the tech demo, like the Mozilla Firefox tech demo, which was beautiful. Like I love that. And that was entirely in ASM. And so his take was like, you know, eventually people are going to stop writing JavaScript. They're going to write better languages that can just compile to JavaScript. But he was like, this is going to be, obviously this is going to be slower. So like the adoption won't be complete until, and then where he took it was like, eventually the operating system itself is just going to be compiled into JavaScript. And like, it's just all going to be like, he called it metal. Like, it's just going to be like containers of JavaScript that like run on the web. And you would write your code in like some language that would then compile to JavaScript, which would, you know, be faster because it would be running native. And I think that part was the part where he like kind of like, that obviously is not going to come to pass. But I do think that the future of like everybody just writes better languages than JavaScript that just compile into JavaScript is like possibly reasonable.
Yeah. So, and when I started looking at it, like Rust or something, it was like, because you still have to get all your mouse events, sort of like calling out in the Unreal thing that we talked about. Like,
Yeah.
you have to interface with JavaScript for the mouse events. And it, in some ways, that's like the most painful. Like, that's kind of the part that sucks. So like, I mean, that's their state management. Yeah. So it's like, especially like very interactive apps. I think maybe the solution, and I think this is kind of what Figma does, is like, if you've kind of got everything in your WASM, if you've got like your own renderer, then maybe you can just pass in the XY coordinates. Like you
Is that
pass
what
in
Figma's doing? Like they have their
really
own
low
renderer?
level. They have, yeah. So I should read the blog post again, but I think it's written in C++ and
That's wild.
compiled to WASM. Yeah, I was telling this to Jake. It's such a weird thing because they've obviously been so successful. Nobody's repeated that I know of, like on any level.
Yeah.
And
Well, Google. So I
yeah,
think actually, I think the thing that Gary did not predict, which I think is where the web is going, is Gary did not predict that, because his interpretation was like, oh, like people will compile things to, because everybody hates JavaScript, so people will compile things in better languages to JavaScript and then like run them natively. And I think what's actually happening is people are writing things in better languages and then running them on the server and streaming them to like a blank canvas in JavaScript.
interesting.
Which is like, I don't know how common that is, but like I posted like Google Docs is doing that now.
You think that's
Um,
what they're doing?
yeah, I 100% think that's what they're doing.
I assume they, like the code was still running on the client, even though they're rendering to a canvas.
Um, Maybe I hmm.
I mean, they weren't very detailed, like, I'm very curious.
No, they weren't detailed. I assumed that they were doing it in the back end. The reason I assumed they were doing it in the back end was because a lot of the like coordination stuff for real time is like a pain, and they don't want to do that in the client. They already have it like centralized in the back end already.
Right, that's interesting.
And then there's other things that are like kind of this direction. Like Mighty is like
Yeah,
explicitly in this
Mighty is
direction.
definitely that thing. Do you think it's
Stadia,
gonna work?
I think it's gonna work. Do I think it's gonna like be a good like take off as like a thing? I don't know.
Yeah,
I,
I
of
don't,
course, I did think it was like a little funny that like instead of just optimizing our code, well, I say
yeah,
just like instead of just optimizing our code, we decide to just run it on a bigger machine somewhere. But um, like Stadia is kind of the same thing, right? Like Stadia
yeah,
is
yeah,
along
definitely.
the same lines.
But Stadia
So
has been not, I feel like
no, but
people
like
haven't been
NVIDIA
thrilled with it.
GeForce is like better, you know. Um, so yeah, so it's kind of all over the place. Like it is kind of interesting, but I
Yeah,
sort of I don't know. Um, yeah. All right,
cool.
I'm gonna go get my pierogies.
Yeah, see ya.
Stop the recording. Yeah. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
I guess who's doing next week? I think me, Ganesh. Okay, well, whatever. We'll figure that out when we get there. All right.
All
See
right,
ya.
see ya.